We're finally here, our milestone 200th episode. From the bottom of my heart, I cannot thank everyone who's been involved with this enough. The listeners, first and foremost, the amazing guests we've had, everyone who's shared, who's connected through these 3.5+ years and 200 episodes. It means the world to me that you guys have been along for the journey. I can't wait to continue to bring more great guests, more episodes, and I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us along the ride and for making it to our 200th episode.
What got you there with Sean DeLaney? What got you there with Sean DeLaney? What got you there with Sean DeLaney? What got you there with got you?
Having that sort of focused and disciplined culture, when that draws in the right types of people, then the real cornerstone to success is, and I told people this all the time about the SEAL teams, like you feel every day getting out of bed, I better show up to work pushing hard. I'm going to try to win our workout in the morning. I'm going to be the best at the range when we go out there to shoot. I'm going to be 5 minutes early for every evolution, because I know if I don't, someone else will. And they're going to look at me and think, hey, do you really want to be on this team? And when you have that level of positive intensity from everyone, you become far more than the sum of your parts, which is the ultimate magic to a great team.
On What Got You There's milestone 200th episode, Sean talks with Chris Fussell, who spent 15 years on U.S. Navy SEAL teams and is a partner at the McChrystal Group Leadership Institute. He is the author of One Mission, How Leaders Build a Team of Teams, and co-author of the New York Times bestseller, Team of Teams. Chris also served as Aide-de-Camp to Lieutenant General Stanley McChrystal during McChrystal's final year commanding a joint special operations task force fighting Al-Qaeda around the globe. Since leaving active duty in 2012, Fussell has also served as a senior fellow for the National Security at New America, sits on the board of directors for the Navy SEAL Foundation, is a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and teaches at Yale University's Jackson Institute. If you want to know what it takes to lead and build teams, then this is the episode for you.
Making change transpire. That's the mission behind the most amazing tasting protein bar brand taking the nutrition industry by storm. That brand, they're MCT Co, and they make the most delicious, keto-friendly, all-natural collagen protein bars. If you're obsessed with the quality of food going into your body like I am, then head out and pick up these amazing bars jammed with 10 grams of collagen protein. They only have 2 to 3 net carbs, no added sugar, and loaded with high-quality MCT oil for the healthy fats from coconuts. Whether you're busy running the kids around from activity to activity, a professional athlete, or just someone looking for a great-tasting convenience snack, do yourself a favor, head to mctco.com and use code WGYT for 20% off your order.
Chris, welcome to What Got You There. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Sean. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, I feel honored to have you. This is a conversation I'm very much looking forward to. But I want to get started with, when we think of an NBA player such as LeBron James, or even a great musician such as a guitarist, each day they're going to have certain drills and routines they go through to stay on top of their craft. You operate in a different environment, in a nonstop changing business type world. What do you do every single day then to get better in almost that knowledge and the learning process? Yeah,
it's a comparison to LeBron James might be pushing the boundaries, but I'm a huge believer in the discipline of a routine, and it's something I wish I were better at. I think I'm pretty decent. I focus on it a lot. I have good days and bad days, more good than bad, but it's critical. You meet plenty of people that are really driven and successful, and to this point, they all have their things that they do, and I think it's just a pretty common trait. Some learn, just some in our DNA, but I'm a big believer in what I like to refer to as your personal cocktail. Like, what are the things that go into your drink that make it work, right? And everybody has a little bit of different flavor to it. And so when I'm working with leaders, that's the first thing I'll ask them, like, forget about mine. What's your cocktail? Like, what do you like to put in the mix? So I know for me, it's having served in the military in some pretty interesting places under physical, mental pressure over extended periods, you start to really understand yourself. So I know how much sleep I need to be productive. Some folks need a lot of sleep, some know a little, but it's important that you know your number. I know what type of workouts I need to be doing on a consistent basis. I know what sort of outside distractions that are helpful to me, time reading, time with just on my own, walking, etc. Time with my family. I have a wife and 2 kids. And then other just sort of outdoors outlets. Outdoors are a really important part of our lives. And so the balance between those for me is key. So I try to be, I set my alarm for 5:30 every morning. It's when I get moving. Try to keep that running through the weekends regardless. I exercise in the mornings. That's my peak time for working out. So I'm up, have a cup of coffee, and then I'm hitting a workout. And whether I do try to give myself at least a rest day a week. My workouts aren't as great as they used to be, but it's still pretty consistent. The 6 days a week doing something, and then I work in a rest day. Then my mental peak hours are just after that. So shower up after a run, spend time with the kids as they're getting rolling. And then I know my best mental hours are, roughly 8-ish till a little bit after 1. And then I can do plenty of busy work, et cetera, through the end of the day. But if I'm going to really focus in on writing, on work-oriented stuff, those are my windows to be most highly productive. And then I try to really refocus my energy back into my family in the evening. Right, I try to shut down work-related stuff, just be present with my wife and kids, and I'm usually trying to get to bed somewhere 11-ish East Coast time. So that's kind of my routine. I know if I'm good 6.5, 7 hours of sleep, beyond 7, and I start to feel lazy. If I go 6 hours consistently, I start to run a little weary, and I try to repeat that 7 days a week.
It's apparent you've put a lot of thought behind this, even if it's just through the amount of time that you've been doing this. So I'm wondering, over that period of time, are there things that you've eliminated or just didn't find the benefit in that you've eliminated from your routine?
Yeah, I don't, I've probably had stages where I got, trying to figure out social media more. I don't do a lot of time there. It just doesn't get my brain into a good space. So I try to avoid that. There's some stuff you have to do to run a business and some stuff just to keep it updated. But I try not to get sucked into the Twitter sphere and that world. As I've gotten older, I've tried to be very disciplined about my eating habits, what I'm eating and when I'm eating it. And so, when I was a younger person in the SEAL teams, I could just kind of eat whatever, whenever I wanted. And you knew you were going to maintain fitness and appropriate weight and all that stuff. And so now I'm much more disciplined about the type of food that goes in, how you're feeding the machine, and also try to drink a heck of a lot less than I did as a younger guy, growing up in a military culture, that's just sort of part of living. But I really find that as you get older, especially, my peak performance mentally is, 8 to 1. And then it happened with a hangover. So really try to look through it that lens, one extra drink that equals a headache from 8 to 10, and you just lost almost half of your performance for the next day.
Yeah, it's one of the brutal effects of getting old. You mentioned a minute ago about just kind of getting that brain into good space. What are some of those activities that help you get that brain into a good space?
Yeah, for me, there's nothing better than physical output, right? Which is why I found putting that good run, even if it's just on an off day, a nice walk to get your heart rate up and get some fresh air. But I really do prefer some sort of exertion type workout. Although at 47, I have to be more disciplined about what those look like. I find nothing better. Get your heart rate up, really get some endorphins flowing. Push yourself physically to the point where I always know I'm having a good workout if I'm not thinking about anything else, right? Because you put yourself in a little bit of physical discomfort, so you're just thinking about the workout. That plus endorphin plus elevated heart rate and oxygen throughput, and I'm really in a great mental place for the next couple hours early morning.
Yeah, when you get yourself with that equation, you're certainly going to be operating at a higher level. You mentioned just some of the physical discomforts, and I know with your past being a former wrestler and then, of course, being a Navy SEAL, you're also really familiar with teamwork. So I'm just curious, how important was the exposure to being part of a team at a really early age for you?
Yeah, I mean, so I was the youngest of four. I have a sister and two brothers. All the boys wrestled. All of us ended up being wrestling at the collegiate level. So, had exposure to really high end of the sport. Not that I was that great myself, but did it for a long time and really appreciated it. And it was all I ever knew, right? I was the youngest of the family. And so from before I can remember, I was rolling around on a wrestling mat. And so you just you're indoctrinated into the team mentality. Wrestling's an interesting sport because it's team and individual at the same time. Like, you're only going to be as good as, for 99% of wrestlers, you're only going to be as good as the room you train in. That's to say, if you have really good workout partners, then you can become as good as they are, or close, right? So there's a team-oriented aspect to it. You're expected to walk into the wrestling room every day, train really hard to make yourself better, but also to make your teammates better. If you're ever dogged in practice, you're hurting your teammates as much as yourself. And then obviously in competition, it's all about the individual. And so just growing up in that environment, I really never had the time to sit back and reflect until I was older on how important that indoctrination into being a supportive teammate was to me, to my brothers, and how it shaped my mentality and my sort of physical focus that helped me roll into the SEAL teams. And not surprisingly, wrestling is one of the sports that does really well in SEAL training. And I think it's really for two reasons. One, you understand physical pain. I mean, wrestling is a pretty miserable sport. It's dead of winter. You're always hungry, cutting weight, and you've got to go out and, you're injured half the time. And it's a pretty intense physical interaction. Coupled with, and that's very similar to going through BUDS in the SEAL teams. It's just kind of 9 months of misery, right? And coupled with understanding what it means to push teammates to work really hard. So you come into that, I know how to maintain my individual focus, but I also know when I perform well on behalf of my teammates, we all perform well as a team.
For someone who's never been exposed to the SEALs, how different is it being on a high-end wrestling team in comparison to what it's like to be with the Brotherhood of the SEALs?
That's a great question. So the most high-end, and to put this in context, I mean, I was decent. I was a decent wrestler. I was not fantastic, world-class by any means, but I was able to wrestle on a Division I college program, but really the best program I was ever associated with. I did a postgraduate year between high school and college as a growth year at a place called Blair Academy, which is a wrestling program up in New Jersey. And for 40 plus years, Blair Academy has had the number one wrestling program in the United States at that level. And so that was the best group of wrestlers, best coach, best team-oriented environment I was ever around. And there were similarities, like the intensity between that program and the way that teammates interacted with each other was similar to what it was like being in a SEAL platoon, where everyone's hyper-focused, understood that the stakes were high. I mean, relatively speaking, it felt really high when you're a young wrestler trying to compete for a national title. And you felt like every day when you walked in the wrestling room, if you didn't bring your A game, which is, you're not going to do that every day, that you were going to get your, teeth knocked in because somebody else was going to bring their A game. But B, that you were letting that down, not just the team, but the legacy of that team. That was such for decades long, what that program at Blair Academy means to the wrestling community is pretty significant. So you felt like you were part of something much bigger than yourself. That's the only pro wrestling program actually that ever felt like that I was part of. When you put on your Blair wrestling warm-ups, you were representing a legacy, right? And that I mentored a young sailor who just made it through SEAL BUDS, basic selection for the SEAL teams. And I sent him a note and said, hey, when you get your trident, which doesn't happen immediately after you finish the program, So you get your warfare insignia that all SEALs wear on their chest for their uniform. Remember, that's not your trident. That's part of a decades long community of practice, and you are being welcomed into that tribe, and you now represent what that organization shows the world. Like you live into that ethos and make it better, and know that every time you do something that weakens it, you not only weaken your own reputation, but you weaken what it stands for. So I think those aspects are, there are a lot of similarities there. If you've been fortunate enough to be part of a high performance team, high performance culture, it's pretty unique to step back and recognize that this is I'm part of a legacy. I'm standing on shoulders that have been around for decades, and it's my job to protect and further that reputation.
Yeah, Chris, you're making my hair stand up just thinking about some of the teams I've been fortunate enough to be a part of. And it's that environment. It's almost that uneasy feeling where every day you just have to absolutely bring it. I'm wondering, what about those environments, what about those teams and groups do you think creates that?
I think it has to do with the legacy of the culture. And by culture, I mean sort of the accepted norms of behavior, right? There's always that sort of mysterious question of what is culture anyway? And that's how I've always looked at it. It's like, what are the unspoken rules? What are the things what are the things that people will just naturally enforce in the hallways? Those sort of trickle up to become your culture, right? And so so you tend to attract people that have a sense of, I want to be part of a culture like that. At my first SEAL Team 2, there was a sign over the door on your way out of the command that had been there from the earliest days. And it said simply, did you earn your trident today? So did you earn your warfare insignia? And some days you'd walk out and after Quiet Tuesday and think, no, I didn't do anything that really earned what this warfare symbol represents. So tomorrow I'm gonna work harder. So that was sort of a cornerstone of our culture. Prove your worth to your teammates every single day. And so I think that having that sort of focused and disciplined culture, when that draws in the right types of people, then the real cornerstone to success is, and I told people this all the time about the SEAL teams, like you feel every day getting out of bed, just like I described wrestling at Blair Academy. I better show up to work pushing hard. I'm going to try to win our workout in the morning. I'm going to be the best at the range when we go out there to shoot, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to be 5 minutes early for every evolution, because I know if I don't, someone else will. And they're going to look at me and think, hey, do you really want to be on this team? And when you have that level of positive intensity from everyone, you become far more than the sum of your parts, which is the ultimate magic to a great team.
I'm absolutely loving these insights. And I'm wondering if there's a method or a type of training, even a system that from your time at the SEALs that you think would be invaluable for anyone in any walk of life, that if you could incorporate this into everyone, you think there'd be exponential benefits? From
a teaming level, I'd start with the obvious one that was important for the SEAL teams, but is not universally transferable. When I got to SEAL Team 2 in the late 90s, you think, oh, I'm done with buds, and sort of the crummy physical stuff is behind me. And then I got to SEAL Team 2, and it was just this, this was peacetime, but it was the most intense group of operators, and it just made such an amazing impression to me. The way that that organization started its mornings 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, in peacetime, in garrison, so back in your home command, with these incredibly intense workouts, 5 days a week, 365. And so, every Tuesday for example, every Tuesday at SEAL Team 2 was a 2.5 mile ocean swim with a 5 mile run back to the command. Rain, snow, or shine. I mean, I literally remember going out in snow, after being at the command for 4 months, to swim 2.5 miles in the ocean while it's snowing out. You're, hypothermic, and then you get out and you run 5 miles back to the command. And I remember as a young guy thinking, I can't do this for the next 10 years, 15 years. Like this is insane, right? But that level of obviously that's not transferable, but for organizations that find ways to pull people together into a point of sort of common suffering with a very positive outcome is a great approach. So at McChrystal Group, my current group that I work with, we pre-COVID strangeness, right? But in years prior, had very consistently 3 or 4 times a year taken groups of anywhere from a dozen to over 20 folks from our group and done things outside. I led a climbing trip every year with about a dozen folks. We would take folks to, Yosemite Falls and go for these, overnight big hikes through the mountains, and nothing to do with our business, all about creating sort of a common frame of working together as a team and knowing that's going to make us far better in our consulting practice. So finding points like that, I think is transferable. Maybe it's physical, there's lots of ways you can approach that, but what am I doing to drive this organization into a team-oriented mentality when they start to see each other and depend on each other in a different way?
You talk about things that are being able to be transferred on, and I'm wondering, with 15 years as a SEAL, did you walk away with something that you just think can't be transferred? It can only be cultivated in that environment you were in?
Yes. So I tell this to my friends that are still in the SEAL teams or younger folks that are joining the SEAL teams. I've been around some pretty tribal organizations, between intense athletics, even our organization now, pretty, very focused, boutique 80-person-ish consulting firm. But I've never seen anything as tribal as the SEAL teams. And by that, I mean the bonds that form between people, that you're either in the tribe or out of the tribe, that run much deeper than your personality, than your own personal likes or dislikes, sometimes more than connection with outside family, et cetera, et cetera. That was always the nature of that organization. And then couple it with, years now of constant combat rotations. And that's very, very hard. And you probably wouldn't want to transfer it over into other organizations. And frankly, it's one of the reasons that many people find transitioning out of those organizations so challenging, because you spend that many years in that intense of a, physical, mental, emotional tribe that just doesn't exist other places. And the breaking away and sort of redefining yourself with another team, another organization, another way of living can be quite a challenge.
How did confidence factor in for all this for you? I'm even wondering about the onset of BUDS and just thinking about going through that. And then once completing that, like you said, every single day it's a battle. So I'm just wondering the context of confidence throughout all of that.
Are you saying confidence or competence?
Sorry, confidence.
Yeah.
I'm a podcast host and I can't properly articulate. No.
Yeah, no, it's important, right? And it changes over your career in a place like that. And there's probably some similarities to, the folks I know in professional sports, especially the more physically dangerous ones like football, et cetera. So folks I know that have played in the NFL, folks that are involved in high-end sort of extreme sports. I do a lot of rock climbing. So that sport, skydiving, et cetera, sports that have a low likelihood but high negative consequence options, and every time you go out and do it, there's similarities across the spectrum, I think, there for how your confidence adjusts over your career. And so there's a real beauty in the naivete you have coming into a thing like the SEAL teams, right? So your confidence going into BUDS, the basic selection process, is physical and mental. Like you're thinking, I won't quit. Right? I don't know what this entails. I really don't know anything about the SEAL teams. I know I want to be associated with this brand. Everything I see about the people that are in this community represent the type of person I want to become. And so the only thing I was confident in going through BUDS was, I'm not going to quit. Maybe if my bone ends up sticking through the side of my leg, or something horrible happens and I'm rolled out of training. Okay. But there's no way I'm going to quit. And that's not special or unique to me. I mean, that's the mentality that training like that is designed to find. They're not looking for just the super triathlete or just the 400-pound bench press person. They're looking for that gritty mentality that says, I can beat this person for literally in SEAL training for 5 days straight during Hell Week. And they're just not going to quit, right? They're going to put themselves into physical danger before they ring the bell, which is what you do when you quit in SEAL selection. And as folks that become instructors in that world, whether it's SEAL training or Ranger School or other high selection special operations units, they can see that relatively quickly. Not always, but they get pretty good at it. Like, this is a person that looks the part, Division I athlete, fast runner, etc. But I don't think they've made that commitment. They're here for perhaps the wrong reasons. They're still not sure that they won't quit no matter what. And I'm going to bear down on them until I find that soft spot. This young kid over here who, has never been in the ocean before he started SEAL selection, I can just tell you he is never going to quit. And so we want to push him really hard to make sure we're right. And then we'll train him up to be the type of operator we need. But they're looking first and foremost for that deep sense of focused grit.
I'm wondering if you've developed a sense of pattern recognition within this. And if so, when you go into some of these elite business organizations, do you see similar traits?
I think pattern recognition is super important, right? And especially in high-end athletics, high-end military units, where you have the luxury of training a lot before you go into a situation. And so what pattern recognition does for you essentially gives you white space, right? And I talk about all the time with our corporate clients, right? You want to put yourself under consistent and intense stress and pressure because it makes things easier for you when that actually happens, right? And so, like, I remember the first time I jumped out of an airplane at 25,000 feet as you go through free fall training, and I don't care how cool and tough and slick you are. The first time you're on night vision goggles and oxygen, you're 25,000 feet off the ground. You're going to be in 2 minutes of free fall in the pitch dark. That's a pretty intense situation, right? And so I remember rolling out and thinking, like, okay, keep your calm. Don't kill yourself. Don't kill anybody around you. And you're just hyper focused, staring at your altimeter, making sure you don't mess up. And then over the radio, I was jumping with some very experienced guys there as well. Over the radio, all going through the same thing. You're all in this big free fall 2-minute drop together. One of the more very experienced folks comes across and says, okay, everybody check your bearing. We should be at this bearing. Your altitude should be here right now. He was talking to all of us like I'm talking to you right now. Like, my heart rate was like 160. His was probably 55. And so he had nothing but white space, right? Everything that was freaking me out, because these were all new patterns, were, he had 7,000 jumps under his belt. So he could put all that into a little box and just focus on what he needed to focus on. And part of that was, I'm going to talk calmly to my teammates and make sure we all get through this together. And so that's the whole, if you boil it down, that's the core reason that you train hard, that you practice hard, and that's true on a wrestling mat. That's true in a shoot house in the SEAL teams. And it's true in the corporate space. I tell people in like the consulting world all the time, hey, it's just as hard to explain how you can help a 6-person startup as it is a 6,000 person mid-cap company, as it is a 300,000 Fortune 10 company. You have to get a lot of reps in so that when you have those big opportunities, you know exactly what you're talking about. Don't think it's, you're not going to suddenly hit a home run if you don't go to batting practice every day, right? And so it's a critical skill, but it's one that only comes to you through hard work. That person I'm describing didn't just easily get 7,000 free fall jumps under their belt, right? They worked really hard at that for years and became a master of their skill.
Are there any self-trained skills where you don't have to actually be jumping out of the 25,000 foot drop there just to be able to train remaining calm during these chaotic type scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a believer in visualization, breathing practices, those sorts of things. Learn how to calm yourself, control your nerves, etc. And there's plenty of sort of science behind how that works. I'm also a big believer in, it's one of the reasons I personally love rock climbing, and I love taking people that don't climb on rock climbing trips, because I mean, I'm not a great climber relative to the climbing world. I'm, very average, right? But there's all of us, 99% of humans are innately anxious about a sport like that, right? Because you're not supposed to go straight up something. You're supposed to go around it, right? And so you get 10 feet off the ground and you're working to place some gear, or your heart rate's going to go up. You're going to get nervous. You're going to start to lose your focus. So whether it's climbing or other quicker hit type activities where people, and you can do this through yoga, which is super low impact, but very physically challenging, where if you don't control your focus and your breathing, et cetera, you're not going to be able to get through the routine like you like to. You can feel those differences in your body. And often it comes down to not that your hamstrings are loose enough, it's that you're not focusing on the task at hand. And so those skills you learn, whether it's meditation, yoga, rock climbing, skydiving, whatever it is you choose, building things into your life that demand presence in the moment to be able to execute effectively, those skills are hyper transferable over. The mental focus, the breathing skills, et cetera, that I focus on when I'm climbing are the same exact ones that I focus on before I walk out onto a stage to deliver a keynote to 1,000 people, or before I walk into an executive office to talk about our consulting firm, where if you can easily feel yourself drifting away from that moment, recenter yourself, recenter your thinking, your breathing, et cetera, and be present in the moment. It's very transferable.
You mentioned you're big into visualization. When you're trying to calm yourself down, are you basically visualizing yourself almost like you're at an elevated state looking down upon yourself?
No, when I think of visualization, I'm a believer in visualizing the event, like quite literally walking yourself through it. So use that skydiving example. So you're gonna jump out of an airplane at 25,000 feet. Sit calmly and think about it dozens of times. Here's exactly how I'm going to step off. I'm going to then go into this body position. I'm going to look at my altimeter. Then I'm going to do this, et cetera, and walk yourself through it in real time, that whole 2-minute cycle. And, there's plenty of science to prove when you get into the moment, your brain feels like it's been there, not 68 times, if that's how many times you thought it through, but also not 0. So you're getting a performance spike. Your body thinks it's done that a dozen times instead of the first time ever. And so you buy yourself, there is some pattern recognition like we were talking about earlier there, and you buy yourself a little bit of space to think. But you can do the same exact thing if you're walking out to deliver a talk to 1,000 people. Visualize, okay, I'm going to come up the stairs, I'm going to turn, these are the first 10 words out of my mouth. And if you can get yourself into that position with the audience, everything else tends to, for most speakers, comes naturally on the backside, right? Or for a big presentation, et cetera. So literally putting yourself in the moment and walking through it multiple times, so your body and mind think, I've been here before.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in that. I used to do it a bunch while playing sports, and then even today I went for a long swim, and I literally was walking through this conversation with you. So I think there's unbelievable benefits to that. You were mentioning some of the skills that are really easy to transfer over. What skill of yours do you just think is hardest to teach new people in your organization?
This is one thing that the SEAL teams is also sort of wrestled with in its selection model, because like any high-end organizations that have the luxury of hiring very talented people, or an organization like SEAL teams that naturally draws in a uniquely talented type of person, roughly they're going to be smart enough. They went to the right school. They can run fast enough, et cetera, fill in the blank, whatever the standards are. Like, they wouldn't show up and knock on the door if they didn't have, most of those, and a good majority of them probably better than the person next to them, right? So what's really hard to test for and teach is without, and I say this based on like different life experiences, without the luxury, sort of in air quotes, of being able to just physically crush someone for 6, 7, 8 months straight, if I can put you through sleep deprivation and cold water and you're physically exhausted and hurt, and then push you harder, I will find out whether you're a gritty person or not, whether you have the discipline, personal discipline, to go beyond your own known limits. And that's just it's hard to interview for, it's hard to test for. You just have to, you wait for those moments where the pressure comes up, and then you highlight who you see quickly who has that and who doesn't. What I found on the outside, now outside of the military, in our consulting firm, we've been very fortunate over the years to build a culture of discipline. It's mostly not military folks, right? Just a few of us that started the firm had that background. It's mostly just super talented, super disciplined consultants, right? And we built this really interesting business, and levels below where I sit in the organization, over now nearly 10 years into it, very much like I saw in the SEAL teams or a great athletic program, those that hold the code of the tribe, one of which is when it's time to work hard, you work hard, are the younger members of the firm, or those that were younger that now have been with us for 6, 7, 8 years, who have taken on that as their responsibility to make sure that we live into that ethos, right? So I think things like that are only teachable through having them embedded into the tribe. And then those that want to be associated with that brand, of course, they're going to look to their senior leadership to say, what are they saying? And what sort of leadership model do they embody? But they really are going to look to their peers and those a few levels above them to say, what sort of tribal norms are we enforcing amongst ourselves when the leadership isn't around, so to speak? And that's when everybody has to step up and be part of it. And so if you can get there as a culture, it's a really powerful tool, but also one that's very hard to teach individually.
Yeah, I can attest to the job that you guys do there at the McChrystal Group. So I actually came by last July. I was sitting down with Jeff Eggers, and the first person who opens the door for me is General McChrystal. And he goes to spend the next 15 minutes with me, grabbing a cup of coffee, and it was the day that you guys were onboarding all of your new employees. And I'm sure he had 5 million other things to do, but it was just such a great example of him being present and showing what true leadership is. And you could see the trickle-down effect with everyone else in there. And so I'd even love to just dive into a bit more what you guys do. And I know you discussed this in your book, and your book is an absolute must-read. One Mission, it's funny, I can always tell how much I enjoy a book by how much I highlight. And I was going through my Kindle notes, and it was just pages and pages of highlights. So huge testament to you. But anyone who's leading a team, I really recommend that they pick this book up. But could you just lay a little groundwork and just say who General Stanley McChrystal is, and then we'll dive into some of the examples and things that you guys do there.
Yeah, so I had the unique experience I was in the SEAL teams from 97 till 2012. And then I selected into the counterterrorism unit, broadly speaking, this inter-military operational unit, Joint Special Operations Command, that Stan McChrystal oversaw from 2003 to 2008. I went through selection for our piece of that, the Navy's piece of that, late 2003, 2004. And so rolled in right as McChrystal was taking over that command. And then his 5th year commanding that, 2008, he was forward deployed for 5 years straight. I spent a year as his aide-de-camp, sort of like a chief of staff type function. So, and now obviously in partners with him at the McChrystal Group, which he founded when he retired in 2010. And so haven't been uniquely positioned to be many rungs below his leadership at a tactical level, sort of experiences firsthand the changes that he made inside of our enterprise. spending a year on the senior staff as his aide, just watching how he and the senior leaders were running this global enterprise in a totally different way than had ever been done before. And then now over the last 10 years, being business partners. What Stan is most known for, and the military history books already have and will continue to capture about his leadership, was that at the right and critical time in our fight against global terrorism, at that point it was Al-Qaeda, Taliban, now we have ISIS and these other permutations of global terrorists. What had changed in the years running up to September 11th was the fact that the information age, so our ability to connect digitally with anybody around the world at light speed, had been adopted, that technology had been adopted by terrorists, right? And so they were able to move from slow moving and very concentrated pockets, because you had to get people together and have secret meetings, and you had to write an encrypted letter and move it around the world through couriers. And they realized, wow, we can just connect digitally all around the world much faster. We can grow quicker, et cetera. And they became a digitally enabled startup, so to speak, right? They had a really good marketing campaign. Their product was extremism and violence, and that attracts a certain type of buyer, so to speak. And their membership was really interested in being part of that tribe. And they could communicate with anyone in the world at light speed, right? And so by 2003, when McChrystal took over the part of the military that was specifically tasked with fighting terrorism around the world, going after these terrorists, he realized quickly, I've taken over an organization that he was once part of as a younger officer that is designed to do these operations in very specific silos. We control information at the top, and it cascades down through these verticals to the appropriate team on the ground. And then we give them their intelligence, their resources, and everything they'll need. They will go out and execute flawlessly one mission, a single operation, then they will come back to the mothership, so to speak. And for generations, we had been in that very linear mindset. We make decisions at the top, we give authorities to troops at the ground, they go do one thing, and then they come home. And he recognized soon into his 5 years running this entire global command, the adversary we're fighting doesn't think like that anymore. Formerly, terrorists were isolated in time and space because they couldn't connect fast enough. So if you found them and you went out and got them, you were going to slow the whole thing down. Now they were communicating through just internet technology that is at all of our fingertips. And so one operation coming back into the mothership with new information, you couldn't possibly move that way of thinking, that very siloed top-down structure fast enough to keep up with this global network. And at the core of it, that's what the history books will write about Stan McChrystal. He was the first leader to recognize we've built a beautiful system that was very well designed for the 20th century, and we're trying to make it applicable to an information age battle space. And no matter how good you are at the job, you can't move fast enough to keep up with this new type of adversary, even though they're much less capable, they never win in the moment, they don't have the same training or funding, et cetera, et cetera. We have all the comparative advantages, but the one thing they can do is move as a network. And networks are not easily defeated unless you start to adapt to some of their behaviors. And so he layered in, on top of this big traditional methodology, a networked system as well. And so you could operate both as a traditional siloed, very bureaucratic player, which in some ways was totally fine, like how you ran your supply chain or how you went through procurement processes, et cetera. And in other ways, you could operate as an absolutely decentralized network, much like the Al-Qaeda threat. And in those examples, that small team could go out to that operation on the ground. And as soon as they found new information, they could independently say, now I'm going to go from this objective to that objective on the other side of Baghdad, without calling in for a bunch of permission, without flying home and showing them what I found. And so we were able to operate with fluidity in one way and then centralized controls in another. And that was the magic of what Stan brought to the military, to the counterterrorism space. And it's the foundation for the work we've been doing in industry for a decade now.
Yeah, what I love most about the book One Mission is just how applicable and how easy you make this to understand in a business context and what we all can do in our organizations, whether it be a small team in a startup or a multi-thousand person organization. And the number of stories you have, even just some of the displays you have in the book, just make it so clear and so concise. So I really did appreciate that. What about specifically, what are you guys doing at the McChrystal Group right now? I'm wondering, when you go into an organization, what does that look like the first few days?
Yeah, the most interesting thing for the last 10 years has been thinking through, like, for me personally, how do you do this? Like, how much of this was just in the DNA of the people and the situation we found ourselves in, et cetera, et cetera. So it's sort of intangibles. And how much of this is transferable? And it's been really a great surprise, if I go back to 10 years ago when we really started this, to recognize how much of it is transferable. And it's transferable for a few reasons. One, because we're all now facing the same problem, right? Especially in the last 3 months during this global pandemic and all the social unrest going on right now in the US and now spreading around the world. We all have fast moving, very complex problems that we're trying to figure out, right? That was certainly true for us on the battlefield. Al-Qaeda wasn't a better terrorist organization. It was a terrorist organization that was interconnected. It could pass information faster than anyone had previously. So organizations around the world, even prior to the last few months, have been wrestling with that. We were built to be perfect in 1997, but now it's year 2020 and we just can't keep up, right? So that's part of the transferability. Now, what we've done to refine how we bring that into organizations has been really interesting. The McChrystal Group is essentially broken into 3 components, and we've learned this over the years. We have an analytics team, we have an implementation team, and we have an academy. And so McChrystal Analytics has a shadow of how we came to view networks. We had to understand the networked threats we were going after before we started taking action. Otherwise, you could just make the problem worse, right? So that sort of thinking, we believe, holds true in how organizations should understand themselves. You have an org chart on the wall, you have business unit heads, et cetera, and that's your very knowable sort of top-down vertical structure. But then there are also networks inside your building that make things happen, that slow things down. There are pockets of excellence that you don't know exist. There are influencers that sit on the 3rd floor. They're a mid-level person you never heard of, but they're the most important person to get this type of stuff done. So our analytics team goes in and will spend the first part of most of our engagements in a 4 to 6 week sprint, essentially, where they are using network mapping tools and a survey analysis where they look at high performance teaming culture, levels of trust, levels of alignment on strategy, those sorts of things that tend to exist in a natural state in a high performance small team. Levels of trust on a basketball court are pretty high, right? Otherwise, you're not going to be a very successful team. We look at those at scale. What are the levels of trust inside this 20,000 person organization, and where do those teaming norms map over to the level of network connectivity? So these 2 teams are disconnected and they also have low levels of trust for each other. Now you have a real problem, right? So we spend our first 6 or 8 weeks there. And then based on those findings, we'll go back to leaders in the organization and say, okay, here's where we could apply some implementation thinking around communication structures, decision-making authorities, pushing them further to the edge so that we can create this network model. And here's where our McChrystal Academy folks can come in and help you think through the behavior change that's necessary to support a faster moving, more transparent, and honest, trust-based model, right? So we find in large organizations, you can blend those 3 together seamlessly. And in some smaller organizations, we'll take one piece of that puzzle and do some focus work and maybe come back later and do something from one of the other verticals.
Yeah, I love just the amount of insights and research you guys have, especially in the book. So I want to make sure people are able to pick that up so we don't dive too deep into that. But I'm wondering about, and this kind of ties back to pattern recognition a bit, What do you think General McChrystal saw in you, and why did he select you for that position?
Yeah, probably because I was willing to do the job. I don't think it was anything too special. I mean, I say because I was, amongst a pool of incredibly talented people, and like most people in an organization like that, you're always pretty sure you're in the bottom quartile, which is the mark of an intense and competitive space, that I think is a good thing. That said, we've talked about it over the years, and I think one thing that he appreciated at least was I did have a real intellectual curiosity about how he and his leaders were making the organization so effective, right? So when I had to sit down and interview with him and some of his current staff for the position, and he asked, why would you want to do a job like this? And and the honest answer was, like most people from units like I came from, hey, sir, I'd never really set out to be an aide, right? I'd rather stay in the operational units. That said, I know you need people like this on your staff, or you wouldn't be asking. So if that's what's helpful to the organization, count me in. I'll give it my best. But personally, if I were to do it, I would be super interested in just studying this from behind the curtains for a year to really understand. I've been the beneficiary of how you've decentralized so many authorities. I've been at the front edge of the fight and been able to move faster as a result of what you've done. But it's really hard to understand that from out there. So to come inside the tent for a year and study it, even just sitting on the back bench and kind of observing all this, I think would be super interesting. Now, I wasn't sure at the time whether there was a thing behind the curtain, aside from just a bunch of really talented senior leaders. And so he just I remember in the interview, just said, oh, okay, that makes sense. And I didn't really know whether he thought I was ridiculous or not. But I realized in hindsight, of course there was a thing. Like, he had redesigned the way the organization functioned and made decisions, et cetera. And so he said in his reflection, like, I saw on your part a genuine interest. So I was almost inviting you in to do your study of how it was all working. And the knock on was you were gonna do the aid stuff as well.
In my prep work for this, it said that interview was only 30 minutes. Is that true?
Yeah, probably. He's a pretty busy guy. So yeah, 30 minutes would have been about right.
So then I'm curious about the assessment process. What does that look like right now for the McChrystal Group?
As when we're hiring folks, this obviously is a strange year for everyone, but in normal times, over the last, 5-6 years, we started a great intern program. Some of our best current employees have come through that as folks coming out of school. We pivoted it to rising seniors. We have, X number of schools that we consistently recruit from. And we've been really lucky to we'll open up, 8 to 10 intern spots a year. We'll get, several hundred applications. We'll boil them down to 100 phone interviews, and we'll do 2 super days of 20-ish each. And then we boil it down to our final set of 10 interns. And then we'll usually make 6 offers on the backside of that. So it's relative to our size. We take that really seriously, and we that's probably our most mature and successful assessment window. I personally think, having interviewed in the military, having interviewed in the corporate space, interviews are just a really hard thing, right? Anybody can be, with the right background and pedigree, can be the perfect person for an hour. They're important to do, obviously. But I'm a huge believer that an internship like that, where you get to see people through multiple lenses, they interact with multiple different teammates, that's the best way you're going to get an assessment of someone. So we certainly overinvest in that sort of model.
You mentioned how hard the interview can be. This was about 5 years ago, but you have one of my all-time favorite interview questions. So I would love to just get your updated take on this if you still use this. And so you start by saying, we're a small community and you and I haven't worked together, but I know a lot of your peers and we're going to follow up with people that you like you and don't like you after this. What will the people that don't hold you in the highest regard, what will they say about you? Do you still use that? And if so, I would love for you just to break down what you usually get out of asking a question like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I use that. That was a great question when you were selecting into different units in the military, because it was so small. Everybody knows each other, or you're one step away from anyone. So if you sit down to interview, you're going to sound brilliant. You're going to do great on all your testing. And then somebody says, hey, Sean, we've never worked together, but I know 10 people that have worked with you. 2 of them are going to have something negative to say, because none of us are perfect. What are they going to say? And it's just it was always a great way for them to self-reflect. The worst answer was, they're going to say I worked too hard or whatever, some silly canned thing. But the best answers were like, yeah, I had a bad month on deployment last time, and here's why, or some real raw and honest moment. I found that in my current world, using that in sort of mentor discussions and relationships is a much more effective tool. I think sometimes that's a bit of it's hard to get past a sort of a pivot towards a rehearsed answer if you use that for younger someone, junior in college that's interviewing for an internship or something like that. That's sort of a meta level question. I think that can be hard at that age. It would have been for me for sure. But we take mentoring very seriously in our firm. And so I love going down that road with folks in our organization. And I like to ask them about me. Like, here's what I think people would say about me right now as on the negative side. So I think it's a great tool for that toolkit. I actually now love the question, because if like I said, we're able to recruit a pretty high level performer from great schools, and they've got these amazing backgrounds, et cetera. And like any other high end consulting firm, the type of folks they would want to draw in. And I don't use it all the time, but I think there's a great question where you can start to unpack the way someone thinks. So I might ask you, it's like, okay, Sean, describe for me, we take teams seriously. We take our organization very seriously. We take helping our clients that tend to be really high performing organizations, take that very seriously. Describe the best organization or team you've ever been part of. And you might describe your fraternity, you might describe your wrestling team, you might describe your university, whatever the case may be. And so I like to go back and forth a little bit there and say, find out kind of why you thought it was so good. Was it the people? Was it the rule book? Was it et cetera, et cetera? And then stopping and saying, okay, now if you could go back and redesign it, what are 2 or 3 things you would have done differently? And you get this really interesting insight into some people that are the constant, and this is what you really have to be as a consultant, that constant level of tinkering and dissatisfaction. How can I make this better? Even though it's already really, really effective. And some people will describe their, wrestling at Blair Academy and be like, I don't know. I just think it was perfect. I mean, it was best coach. We won the nationals. I wouldn't change anything. Right. Which is great. That means you're an awesome performer to perform at that level, but you weren't staying up at night and going, if I could change one thing, it would be this. And then you see others that are like, oh, here's exactly what I would have changed about the number 1 prep school wrestling program in the country, which is kind of a bold statement, right? But you could tell they're like, I've been waiting for somebody to ask me this question. This is the one thing we did wrong all the time, and here's how I would have changed it. And you get this real, and I could care less what the answer is. I just want to know do you think like this?
Wow, I absolutely love that new interview question. I'm glad you brought that one up. You've mentioned so far in this interview, you just talked there a minute ago just about that constant tinkering, and then also curiosity came out earlier. I'm wondering for you right now, at this stage where you are in your life, your career, what are you tinkering with the most? Where your curiosity is leading you to?
It's a timely question because I think a lot of us are doing some deep reflection right now with everything that's going on in the world. And I've had the unique privilege of spending years in pretty intense space, battlefield, consulting, et cetera, while also having to keep your intellectual rigor up, right? We didn't just figure out, we beat Al-Qaeda through like helicopters and grit, right? It was an intellectual game as well. Consulting is an intellectual game. Teaching, I teach courses, that's an intellectual game. And so right now, I think we're all, I know for me, it's like really diving into, at a personal level, family level, et cetera, what has gone wrong? What has gotten us to this point? How has the social fabric gotten this weak, so that it can be sparked, with a few different variables coming together? And what can we do to fix that? What's our responsibility as individual citizens, as fathers and mothers, as family units, as members of a community, as society, et cetera? Where should we be putting our energy right now towards solving those sorts of problems? I don't know what that answer will look like, but I know for me and my wife and family, we are thinking deeply about like, how can we be better parts of this solution, which I don't know what the solution will be, but I know we have to be constantly looking for ways moving forward to be oriented towards something that will shore back up that social fabric and all the other problems that have led us to this brink, which is not I have a 9-year-old and 11-year-old. We live in the middle of Washington, D.C., which we love. And I want my kids to see their parents as part of an active solution toward, reshoring up what this country stands for, in a very positive direction, and set that example for them. So that's sort of where my head is oriented right now.
Yeah, you have a quote in your book that I absolutely love, and I would just love to get your take on it. So that quote is, "Take accountability for your actions. Develop and nurture a strong internal locus of control. In the military and in business, the most elite and effective teams I've seen or been part of are filled with individuals who take responsibility for their choices. Life is a series of decisions that you make and actions you take, not a series of things that happen to you." I'd love just for you to riff on that for a minute right now.
Yeah. You've read my book more recently than I have, but yeah.
Sorry, I've been nerding out on it for like the last week, getting pumped for this conversation. So my apologies.
I appreciate it. That thinking actually started for me. I'm fortunate to have a great family, and I'm very close to my sister and her husband as well. They've got 4 great kids. Our families are tight, but her husband has been a friend, mentor, role model, et cetera, for many years, as long as, going back 20 years or more. And he came from a pretty unique background, in as much as like just was a fine family, but like didn't grow up with a silver spoon in his mouth, or high expectations, wasn't sent to some fancy private school, et cetera. He was just sort of grinded away on his own. He ended up going to Duke University on an academic ride, UVA medical school, became an ear, nose, throat surgeon, completely self-starter. And I remember talking to him once years ago. I was in the military, but I was relatively young, about sort of how did you not end up falling into the pitfalls that, 9 out of 10 people or more than that in your circumstances, your life circumstances, would have fallen into. And he's not very self-absorbed or reflective on these sorts of things. So he doesn't take himself too seriously. He said, I don't know. I think I realized at an early age that I would pay consequences for all my actions, and they might be good consequences or bad, but they were going to be completely up to me because I didn't have a safety net. So I just decided to make as many good choices as I could. And it was really an important moment of reflection for me, having grown up in a slightly different circumstance than my brother-in-law, where, as a young kid, we could make missteps and kind of get pulled out of it because, you had that social network fabric that was looking out for you, which is not necessarily a healthy thing. And that was a very important pivotal moment in my life. I think fortunately I've been raised by parents that had instilled that, at least in me, that external locus of control, which I think is critical. It's the one thing that I harp on constantly with my children of, you took that action, that was a consequence. Therefore, who is responsible for that? Whether it's a scraped knee or something happens at school, et cetera. And they know there's only one right answer. They're responsible for it, right? You're 9 years old, but you chose to take an action. That was a consequence, and you will take responsibility for it. And you're going to deal with the consequences, right? And so I don't think you can give a better gift to a kid than that sense, personally. Like, you will make a series of decisions every single day of your life. All of them will have outcomes, and you have to be responsible for dealing with those. They may be good, they may be bad. And so I think what I saw in good military units, what I see in a good practice like we've tried to build here at McChrystal Group, is people that have that sense of, I happen to the world doesn't happen to me. And again, it's a hard thing to test for or interview for, et cetera. But when you see it go bad, it's something I just want to walk away from. Like, this isn't recoverable. If you're 10 years into your professional career and your attitude is still, well, it's because I got a bad boss. Hey, everybody gets a bad boss, right? What are you going to do to fix it? Is the question. And on the other end, when you see it in an extreme where people have that, I will take control of my own world, it's so powerful. Like, I remember this young woman that worked for us at McChrystal Group years ago, and Stan McChrystal and I had to be in New York for some engagement with a client. She was bringing briefing packets from DC. There was, some massive storm that shut down the railways all the way up the East Coast. And she was supposed to leave that morning, et cetera, et cetera. 5 minutes before the meeting starts, she walks in the door, and I, cool as cucumber, had the briefing papers, et cetera. And I remember asking her, like, on a break in the meeting, how did you get out of DC? And she just looked at me and said, I figured it out. Didn't offer any details. I don't know. I still this day, I don't know what she did. Right. But it wasn't on Amtrak. And most of the planes were late, and she just figured it out. And she, was like, this person will, if she stays around, she'll be the president of this consulting firm, because she's 22 years old and she just took complete accountability for action, and she answered the mail. And you see it in those moments, or you don't. And when you see it, you just know, like, this person will change the world if they want to.
Chris, 200 episodes of this podcast. I really don't know if there's been a more important and better 5 minutes ever. So that was incredible. I really appreciate that. Do you have a few more minutes to go on for some things here?
Yeah, I sure do.
Awesome. So you brought up again and again just the mentors that you've had and mentorship. I'd love to get your current day perspectives on how you view mentorship. I know in the past you've talked about kind of having that plus minus equals, and someone you're teaching, someone you're equal to, and then someone you're striving to be better. Is that currently how you're viewing mentorship today?
Yeah, just for your listeners, and that's something that a mentor of mine told me in the SEAL teams, that look up, look left and right, and look down. Always have people above you that you're trying to emulate and learn from. Always be looking for peers that are doing it better than you are. Share that with them and learn from each other. And always look down and look for the people that are doing the job you did last year, but doing it better. And if you can't do that, if you can't look down and find somebody more competent, either you did a bad job mentoring them, or you have too much of an ego and you should look for something else to do with your life. So yeah, no, I think that is still a very important lens. Probably the one area where I've evolved in the most over the last few years on this is believing it more deeply than ever. But the proactivity of creating mentor relationships is something that I try to really talk with younger folks in our firm about. And I will tell people, okay, you've been in the professional space for 18 months, right? You just graduated college a year and a half ago. Who are you mentoring? And they're thinking, I'm still figuring out how to like find an apartment in DC. Like, no. There's somebody at your university that can learn from you right now. There's an intern in our summer program that can learn from you right now. You are aging in dog years as soon as you start in the professional space. 18 months has gone by in a snap for you, but you are way more experienced and worldly and approachable to that senior at your university, or to the person that is on your old athletic program back at school, or this new hire that just walked through the door. Seek them out and be their mentor. And maybe, in 18 months, you'll be much more like near peers, and then do it again, go deeper again. So keep looking for those relationships and paying it forward. Right. And I think if one thing's changed or evolved in my thinking, it's that we all think that we should be doing that much later in life than I think is actually the case. And I'll encourage, 22, 23-year-olds all the time to say, hey, you should be mentoring 2 or 3 people all the time from here on out for the rest of your career.
Do you have any good stories or examples of someone you've been mentoring that just really helped set them apart, that something they did, an action they took, where it really left a lasting impression on you?
Yeah, but nothing I would take credit for. I think a good, it's the difference between a sort of a mentor and a role model, I guess maybe would be the way to describe it. I don't want to be a role model for people, right? Because I think we're all our own unique and individual creatures, right? And here are the moral boundaries we should all live inside of, the level of respect we should have for one another on the planet. But aside from that, the way I've lived my life, the things I've done, like, don't try to model yourself after that, because we're just too unique and different in countless ways. So if I was mentoring Sean, I would want to make that clear. Like, look, I'll tell you, I'm an open book. I'll tell you everything about me and my choices and the way that I've navigated things that have gotten me here, but don't learn from that in a way that you hope to repeat it. Learn from it and how it can apply to who you are as a person. And so when I see, and I've been fortunate to be around some amazingly talented folks throughout my career. Some of which I've been able to put myself in a mentor position, even if only for a brief window. But I can tell you, for example, a person that I served with in the SEAL teams was a few years younger than me, and so we served together in a few units. And just based on seniority, I was in charge of this person, but also kind of served as a mentor as he figured out how to navigate the SEAL teams. He got out. And I think we learned from each other, I think helped adjust the way he thought about being a leader. When he was in the position I was in, running a SEAL platoon, he was much better than I was. I can maybe take a little bit of influence credit there. And then he got out years before I did and went on into the banking world, and now makes millions of dollars and runs a big piece of a huge global bank, right? That has nothing to do with me at all, right? Maybe there was a window where he was learning some things in our mentor-mentee relationship that helped shape his thinking. He evolved into a better leader, maybe marginally better than he would have been had we not had that relationship. And it's, for me, super satisfying to see people that you've been in position with to then become your one of your peers that you're looking over to and saying, I am now learning from this person as much or oftentimes more so than they were learning from me.
You bring up such a great point there in the distinction that each person is their own individual, and you can pick certain things and develop your own self there, but not trying to emulate exactly. I just love that point, so I just wanted to hit on that again. I know we've got to wrap up here in a minute. I would love to know about your reading, because I know you're widely read, and I'm wondering what resources over the years have you continued to go back to?
So I get in these waves of reading. But I'll get into a space, and so not surprisingly, given what's going on, I've read, 3 tomes on pandemics over the last few months and listened to, I don't know, a dozen lectures or so around immunology, et cetera, et cetera. So I tend to get into these spaces. That's how my brain works, and I'll kind of soak it all up and then move on. And I've sort of always been like that. I remember one summer when I was, 13, I read every Kurt Vonnegut novel, which is a bad idea because they all kind of interplay with each other and you get lost in it. So you can't remember what's going on at any given time. But went through a Stephen King phase, read everything by Stephen King that I could in like 2 years or whatever. I don't know. But so I think that pattern has always stuck with me. And I think, again, it depends on how your brain's wired. It's always been a really effective one for me to get kind of deeply immersed in stuff. But for texts that I've gone back to over the years, I studied philosophy in college. And so I think there are certain bits there all the way back to like the ancients. And I was, real philosophers are just sort of brilliant people all around. Like they're mathematicians and scientists, et cetera, all kind of bundled into one. The beauty of studying philosophy was I realized I wasn't that smart, but knew enough to say we have been asking the same questions for, since there have been smart people writing things down. And so going back and revisiting texts by the classics, Aurelius, Plato, Socrates, writings, thinkings, etc. Not to grandstand, and I'm good enough to get through like a page of something like that before I have to stop. But if I've been consistent about one thing since I graduated college, it's been going back and visiting some of the thinking and writing of the ancients, and that was just going to put in my DNA from what I studied in school.
I know you've hit on a few biographies in past interviews. Any ones that you've really enjoyed over the years?
Yeah, the ones that probably have stuck with me the most, not surprisingly, have been military leaders, even though, I'm not this sort of beat your chest, you've got to be in the military sort of person. I really enjoyed my experiences there. I got, a lot out of that chapter of my life. But so I can connect with a military biography. I think what's special about military biographies, honestly, is that the more senior folks, their lives are so recorded so that the biographies can be incredibly precise. Think of relative to their time, what we knew about, a Grant or an Eisenhower or sort of fill in the blank. Now we're all like digitally fingerprinted and we know where you were every minute of every day. And so that's much more common if you wanted to take the effort and go back and kind of figure stuff out about somebody. But what's unique about, an Eisenhower is just given the intensity and positions he was in for so many years, from being a senior-ish officer serving under MacArthur all the way to running the European theater to being president, very unique to his times and his peer group. We sort of have a really accurate record of where he was day by day, if not minute by minute at some points. So you can write these incredibly rich in context biographies. And so I've always really enjoyed those. And one of the things, so Stan McChrystal and I have been teaching a leadership seminar together for years outside of our consulting practice. And one of the points we always make to our students is when you read the biography or you think of the great person in history, don't remember him or her like the statue, right? The reason you read a biography, in my opinion, is to try to put yourself into their headspace. These are real people. Which is why it's important. If you want to really understand a leader, you have to read left and right. You have to read outside of that single biography about the times, the history, what were living conditions like, what was the economy like, the things that a biographer might not necessarily have the space to dive deeply into, so that you can put yourself in their shoes and try to think through the lens of, this was a normal-ish person, right? And every day, back to our earlier discussion, they were making decisions about what they were going to do, who they wanted to be, how they were going to treat their family and friends, et cetera. And what we always encourage, the takeaway there should be anyone around this table could be the next Eisenhower, the next Lincoln. There's nothing saying that won't happen. So don't think that because there's a statue of Lincoln that on the night he was killed, he thought of himself as that leader, you know? And I love that, using that example, because if you really put yourself in President Lincoln's position, imagine that moment, the night he was killed. So, you know, they decide to go down to the theater. The country is in complete disarray. It's unknown whether it will really come back together. He has the lives of thousands of people resting on his soul. His wife has gone through major bouts of mental illness. He's lost a child, and then he gets shot, right? Do you think he thought of himself as this heroic figure with a massive statue at the center of our nation's capital on that night? Probably not. He was probably exhausted and thinking, what the heck am I doing right now? And that's why I love reading biographies like that, where you can really put yourself in the shoes of those leaders and say, am I going to make the decisions every day that it takes to become someone that can drive change, when 99 times out of 100, it will be easier to take the easy road, right? And those leaders consistently say, no, I need to do the next hard thing, because that's where the real change can come from.
Chris, you were joking earlier about LeBron James and not being in that category. There's people who play games, and there's people who play games, and they're just at such a higher level in those games. And I can honestly say you are absolutely one of those people. This has been just such a treat for me, getting to learn some of these takeaways here. So I love this. Final one before we wrap up here. If you were sitting down to interview anyone in the world, dead or alive, that's not a family member or someone you just want to sit down with again, who would that be for you?
It's an interesting question. I would answer this differently on any given day, right? Because there's just countless folks that it would be fascinating to sit down and talk with. I think given, and I'm going to put aside the current sort of social unrest and everything going on. Prior to that, my life has been so immersed in and knock-on effect from the events of 9/11, et cetera, that honestly, I would probably pick one of the critical figures that led to that decades-long series of events that got us to 9/11, that got us to where we are now. And that could be someone from the original sort of pan-Arab state leadership that really had a mindset of that ended up being sort of a false bill of goods, and really getting inside their head saying, is this just a personal goal? Or do you think this can really work? Or someone from the terrorist side, like Zawahiri, who is by all accounts still alive, so I may not fit your category, but sort of the original thinker on the Egyptian side of the Al-Qaeda terror networks, and saying, is this what you thought would happen? Like, it would be really interesting for me to try to get inside their head. So, you know, some of the smart original founders in that space, and trying to map their desired end state versus what has actually unfolded as a result. But ask me tomorrow and I'm sure I'd have a totally different answer.
Yeah, no, Chris, there's too much good stuff here. I really hope that we can sit down at some point in person and do a round two here. But in closing here, of course, we're going to have everything linked up to the McChrystal Group, to the book One Mission. Anywhere else you think the listeners would be interested or they should go to stay connected with you?
Yeah, I'm at Fussell Chris on Twitter. I'm not a big social media person, or our website's probably the best place, or people can ping me on LinkedIn. We distribute a lot of stuff through our LinkedIn accounts.
Great. We're going to have all that linked up. But once again, Chris Fussell, I truly mean this. You've been impactful as someone for me to learn from throughout the years. And I just really do appreciate and thank you for this conversation.
No, thank you. Great discussion. Awesome questions. So good luck with everything. And let me know if I can be helpful.
You guys made it to the end of another episode of What Got You There. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I really do appreciate you taking the time to listen all the way through. If you found value in this, the best way you can support the show is giving us a review, rating it, sharing it with your friends, and also sharing on social. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Looking forward to you guys listening to another episode.